Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became a hybrid of Superman and Shazam after a dimensional rift. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The sun was dying. Izuku Midoriya felt a grim, hollow kinship with the celestial body as it bled orange and violet across the Muzidifu skyline. Its descent was slow, inevitable. A majestic surrender to the encroaching darkness. His own surrender had been far less graceful. It had been a clumsy, sputtering, tear-soaked affair on a rooftop, at the feet of his idol, his god, All Might. The name was a prayer, a mantra, a curse. It echoed in the cavern of his skull, a space that felt too large and too empty all at once. The hero's words, spoken with a tired kindness that was somehow more brutal than any fist, played on a relentless loop. It's not wrong to dream. But you need to be realistic, kid. Realistic. Izuku's foot scuffed against the loose paver on the sidewalk. A small family, a mother, a father, a little boy with bright red wings sprouting from his back, gave him a wide berth. He probably looked as broken as he felt. His yellow backpack, usually a comforting weight, felt like it was filled with lead. His uniform was rumpled and damp in places from a combination of sweat, sludge, and tears. His face was a mask of exhausted grief. Realistic. The word was a cage. For 15 years, he had lived in the reality of being quirkless, a biological error in a world of wonders. He was a rotary phone in the age of smartphones, a candle in a city of neon. But his dream had never been realistic. It had been an act of defiant, desperate faith. The faith that a hero wasn't just a collection of powers, but a state of being. The conviction that the will to save was more important than the ability to. Today, that faith had been executed. Pros are always risking their lives. I can't, in good conscience, tell a quirkless kid to jump into the fray. He had felt the words like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs, shattering the very foundation of his identity. And the worst part, the truly soul-crushing part, was that All Might was right. He had seen it himself, just hours before. He had been useless. A liability. He charged in to save Kaken from the sludge villain not with a plan, but with a scream and a thrown backpack. An act of suicidal stupidity that had only served to distract the villain for a few precious, pathetic seconds. He was praised for it later, of course. The other pro-heroes on the scene had clapped him on the back, calling him brave, gutsy. But their eyes held a different story. They saw a reckless child who had nearly gotten himself and the hostage killed. They saw the problem that All Might had to solve. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, the memory of All Might's skeletal form a fresh wound. The secret of the symbol of peace was safe with him, a shared burden that felt more like a final, crushing weight. To be entrusted with such a secret, only to be told he wasn't worthy of the dream that secret protected. The irony was a bitter acid in his throat. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, his knuckles brushing against the crisp corner of Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. The notebook felt foolish now, a childish collection of fantasies. All his notes, his analysis, his careful observations, what had they been for? He was a scholar of a language he could never speak, a cartographer of a world he could never truly inhabit. The city hummed around him, a symphony of indifference. Cars with sleek, aerodynamic designs zipped past. A man with skin like shifting granite hailed a cab, a woman laughed, and a shower of harmless, glittering sparks fell from her hair. Everyone was a part of the grand, super-powered tapestry of life. Everyone but him. He was approaching the underpass now. The very same one where his day had taken its first nosedive, where he had been assaulted by the sludge villain. The concrete tunnel seemed darker now, more menacing. It was a throat, and it had tried to swallow him whole once today. Now, passing through it felt like walking through his own tomb. The air was cool and still, amplifying the sound of his own ragged breathing and the soft, sad shuffle of his shoes. He thought of his mother. He'd have to go home and face her. He'd have to look into her kind, worried eyes and tell her, what? That she was right all along? That the doctor with the callous smile, and the extra joint in his pinky toe had sealed his fate from birth? He could already picture her reaction. She would cry. She would hug him and apologize as if it were her fault. I'm sorry, Izuku. She would sob, and the sound would break what little was left of his heart. No. He couldn't face her. Not yet. Emerging from the underpass, blinking in the fading light, he made a snap decision. Instead of taking the familiar left turn towards his apartment complex, he turned right, down a narrow street that led towards the industrial outskirts. It was a place of forgotten warehouses and chain-link fences, a part of the city that was as overlooked and discarded as he felt. He just needed to walk, to put one foot in front of the other until the burning knot of failure in his chest loosened its grip, if only for a moment. He wandered without purpose, his feet carrying him down increasingly deserted streets. The hum of the city center faded, replaced by the lonely clatter of loose debris kicked up by the wind, and the distant groan of machinery. He found himself in a labyrinth of brick and rust, a maze of back alleys that smelled of damp concrete and neglect. It was here that the world decided to break. It began not with a sound, but with a feeling. A sudden, jarring drop in air pressure made his ears pop. The gentle evening breeze died instantly, leaving the air unnervingly still and heavy, thick like water. The ambient temperature plummeted, and goosebumps erupted on his arms. He looked up at the sky, expecting to see a sudden storm front, but the clouds were thin, wispy vestiges of the sunset. There was no natural explanation. Then came the smell. It wasn't the familiar petrichor of impending rain. It was the sharp, sterile scent of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike, but mingled with something else, something ancient and metallic, like old blood and deep earth. He froze in the center of a particularly grim alley, sandwiched between a crumbling brick warehouse and a graffiti-scarred concrete wall. A single, flickering fluorescent light overhead cast a sickly yellow pallor on the scene. This was not a good place to be. Every instinct, honed by years of being a target for bullies, screamed at him to run. A new villain? Some kind of quirk activating? But then he saw it. At the far end of the alley, where the shadows were deepest, the air began to shimmer. It was like heat haze on a summer road, but it was happening in the cold, still air. The shimmering intensified, coalescing. The space between the walls seemed to warp, to bend inwards as if being pinched by an invisible, cosmic hand. A low hum vibrated through the soles of his shoes, a bass note so deep it felt like it was resonating with his own skeleton. It wasn't a sound his ears could properly process. It was a feeling, a pressure, a presence. And then, with the silent, horrifying grace of a crack spreading across a pane of glass, reality tore open. There was no explosion, no concussive blast. Just a silent, spreading fracture of light. It wasn't a door or a portal in the conventional sense. It was a wound, a festering, beautiful, terrifying wound in the fabric of the world. It bled colors he had no names for, shades of emerald green that were alive with kinetic energy, and shimmering golds that felt as old as time itself. The edges of the rift were sharp, crystalline, as if the world itself had been shattered. Izuku's mind, the analytical engine that had catalogued hundreds of quirks, sputtered to a halt. This was not a quirk. Warp gates, like Kurogyries, were defined, controlled. This was chaos. This was a fundamental law of physics being violated in a back alley in Muzidafu. His fear was a cold, solid thing in his gut. Run, his brain screamed. Get out of here. You're quirkless. You're helpless. This is how you die. But then, another thought pushed through the panic, a thought so deeply ingrained it was more of a reflex than a conscious decision. Is anyone hurt? The question was absurd. He was alone in the alley. But the rift, what if it was unstable? What if it expanded? What if it pulled someone in? What if something came out? His feet, betraying every self-preservation instinct he possessed, took a hesitant step forward. And another. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was walking towards the anomaly, towards the impossible tear in his world. Why? Because that's what a hero would do. The irony was a fresh stab of pain. He, the boy who had just been told he could never be a hero, was now the only person here to act like one. His despair and his heroic spirit were at war within him, and his spirit, stubborn and foolish, was winning. Hello? He called out, his voice a pathetic squeak that was instantly swallowed by the profound hum of the rift. Is anyone there? Does anyone need help? As he drew closer, the nature of the rift became clearer. It wasn't just light, it was information. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if he were standing on the edge of a cliff overlooking infinity. The rift was a window into somewhere else. Somewhere vast and fundamentally different, and from that window, two dying lights were reaching. They emerged from the tear not as projectiles, but as flowing, ethereal streams of energy, like liquid starlight. They were faint, flickering, clearly at the end of their existence. Remnants. Echoes. One was a brilliant, solar gold, tinged with a deep, heroic crimson. As it drifted towards him, Izuku felt an overwhelming sense of cosmic loneliness, of a vast and empty void. But beneath the loneliness, there was an even more powerful current, hope. A boundless, unyielding hope. He felt the phantom sensation of a loving hand on his shoulder, the whisper of a name he didn't know, Kal-El, and the image of a world bathed in the light of a gentle yellow sun. It was the essence of a champion, a paragon, the last son of a dead world who had become the protector of a new one. It was dying, its final duty to find a vessel worthy of its legacy. The second stream of energy was utterly different. It was a crackling, electric blue-white, interwoven with the primal green he'd seen in the rift. It felt ancient, powerful, and wild, like a thunderstorm trapped in a bottle. It smelled of ozone and old stone. As it approached, his mind was flooded with a different kind of sensation, the weight of immense wisdom, the rumble of divine thunder, the feeling of a sacred duty passed down through millennia. He saw a flash of a cavernous throne room, a wizened old man with a long white beard, and heard the echo of a single, powerful word of magic. This was the essence of a guardian, a conduit for the power of gods, and it too was fading, seeking a soul pure enough to bear its storm. The two energies, from two different realities, two different flavors of heroism, drifted through the alley. They seemed to be searching, scanning. Izuku, standing frozen in a mixture of terror and awe, felt their attention fall upon him. He felt scanned, weighed, measured. They weren't looking at his body, his muscles, or the telltale absence of a quirk factor. They were looking deeper. They were looking at his soul, and in the shattered, despairing soul of Izuku Midoriya, they found what they were looking for. They found the bedrock of heroism that existed beneath his fear and self-doubt. They saw the boy who charged a monster with a backpack. They saw the tears he shed for others' pain. They saw the unwavering, illogical, beautiful desire to save people with a smile. They saw a heart so full of heroic potential that it practically screamed into the void. They found a champion. Izuku had no time to process what was happening. The golden, cosmic energy surged forward first. It didn't hit him, it flowed into him. The sensation was indescribable. It was like drinking sunlight. A profound, invigorating warmth spread through his entire being, sinking into his bones, his blood, his very cells. His mind was assaulted by a tidal wave of fragmentary visions, a planet of red crystals exploding in a silent cataclysm, a loving father with a symbol on his chest, placing a baby in a tiny starship, the unfamiliar warmth of a yellow sun on alien skin, a lifetime of strength, flight, and unwavering duty. It was the legacy of Superman, the hope of the House of El, pouring into him. He cried out, stumbling back, his mind reeling from the psychic backlash. But there was no respite. The second energy, the electric, magical one, followed an instant later. It struck him like a bolt of lightning that didn't burn, but electrified his spirit. If the first energy had filled his body, this one seized his soul. A storm erupted within him. He heard whispers in a language older than humanity, the names of 6 immortal elders echoing in a chamber of his mind he never knew he had: Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, Mercury. The power was immense, a raw, untamed divinity that promised wisdom, strength, stamina, lightning, courage, and speed. It was the power of the wizard Shazam, a magical inheritance seeking a heart pure enough to wield it without being corrupted. The two forces, one alien and biological, the other magical and divine, met within the vessel of Izuku Midoriya. They did not fight. They recognized a shared purpose in their new host. They merged, intertwined, weaving themselves into his spiritual and physical DNA. The cosmic power of Krypton became the bedrock of his being, a constant potential waiting for a solar catalyst. The divine power of the gods became a second, deeper wellspring, a storm he could summon with a single word of power. The overload was too much. Izuku's vision widened out. The hum of the rift, the whispers of gods, the memories of a dead planet, it all crescendoed into a single, overwhelming roar. He felt his body being rewritten on a molecular level. He felt his soul being expanded to contain two separate, godlike legacies. The last thing he saw before consciousness deserted him was the rift itself. Having fulfilled its purpose, its energies expended, it began to collapse. The wound in reality healed itself, the impossible colors receding as the edges stitched themselves back together with another silent, crystalline fracture. In a final, brilliant flash of emerald and gold, it was gone. The alley was plunged back into a grimy, flickering darkness. Izuku Midoriya lay crumpled on the wet asphalt, steam rising gently from his body in the cold air. He was unconscious, his mind a maelstrom of alien memories and divine whispers. The world around him was the same, but he was irrevocably, fundamentally changed. He was no longer just Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless, hopeful boy. He was something more. Something new. Something impossible. And when his eyes eventually fluttered open a few moments later, the world came rushing in, and it was screaming. His first coherent thought was, loud. The gentle patter of a nascent rain, which had just begun to fall, was not a patter. It was a deafening roar, each individual droplet hitting the ground with the percussive impact of a drumstick on a snare. He could hear the hiss of it striking the hot metal of the fluorescent light fixture above him, a sound he should have been physically incapable of perceiving. He clamped his hands over his ears, a useless gesture, as the sound seemed to be inside his head as much as outside. He squeezed his eyes shut, but it was no better. The world was too bright. Even through his eyelids, the single, pathetic light in the alley was a searing nova. It was white-hot, blinding. He could perceive the electric current humming through its wires, see the frantic dance of electrons within the tube. He could see the microscopic scratches on his own eyelids. He rolled onto his stomach, pressing his face into the rough, wet asphalt, seeking darkness, seeking silence. But it only made it worse. He could feel everything with an impossible new clarity. The rough texture of the ground wasn't just rough. It was a mountain range of grit and stone against his cheek, each tiny pebble an agonizing point of pressure. The dampness of his uniform wasn't just wet. It was a clinging, abrasive shroud, the individual fibers scraping against his skin. Panic, pure and undiluted, seized him. His breath hitched in his throat. He tried to push himself up, and his hands sank an inch into the asphalt as if it were soft clay, the rock groaning in protest. He yelped, snatching his hands back. He could see the perfect, five-fingered impressions he had left behind. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. It was a dream. A hallucination brought on by stress and despair. He was still on that rooftop, and all might was shaking him awake. But the sensory assault was too total, too vivid. He could hear the frantic, hummingbird-fast beat of his own heart. No, two hearts. One was his own, terrified and racing. The other was a deeper, slower, more powerful rhythm thrumming with a strange, solar energy. He could hear the blood rushing through his own veins, a roaring river. He could hear the conversations of people in the apartment building a block away, their words a meaningless, overlapping cacophony. He could hear the flutter of a moth's wings as it batted against the windowpane 3 streets over. The world had been a muted television program his entire life, and someone had just cranked the volume, the brightness, the contrast, the everything to a million. Curling into a fetal position in the center of the alley, Izuku Midoriya did the only thing he could. He shut his eyes, covered his ears, and waited for the screaming world to stop, unaware that the loudest screams were now coming from the burgeoning godhood inside him. The echo in the alley was gone, but an echo of 2 dying worlds now resided in his soul, and their symphony was just beginning. The first sensation was silence. It was a profound, blessedly empty quiet that was more comforting than any blanket. The roaring, screaming, overwhelming world of the alleyway had vanished, replaced by the familiar stillness of his own bedroom. Izuku's eyes shot open, a ragged gasp tearing from his throat. He was tangled in his all-might-themed comforter, his cheek pressed against his pillow, not the cold, unforgiving asphalt. His room was cast in the deep, pre-dawn gloom, the only light a sliver of electric orange from the streetlights peeking through his curtains. A dream? The thought was a desperate prayer. It had to be. A nightmare, born from the absolute worst day of his life. The sludge villain, the rooftop confession, the crushing weight of reality. It had all coalesced into a fever dream of impossible lights and terrifying power. He sat up, his body drenched in a cold sweat, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The air tasted normal. The silence felt normal. He was okay. It wasn't real. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his feet finding the cool wood of the floor. He felt shaky, drained, like he'd just run a marathon. He glanced at the digital clock on his desk. 5:17 a.m. He didn't remember coming home. The last thing he could clearly recall was turning down that desolate side street, seeking solitude in his despair. A soft click broke the silence as his bedroom door opened a crack. His mother, Incommodarea, peeked in, her face etched with a familiar, maternal worry. "Izuku? You're awake?" she whispered, her voice thick with sleep and concern. She was already dressed in her house clothes, a testament to how early she always rose. "You gave me such a scare last night." Izuku's blood ran cold. "Last night?" She bustled into the room, her hands fluttering anxiously. "You came in so late, honey. You looked like you'd been through a war. You just mumbled something about being tired and collapsed onto your bed before I could even ask what happened. I was so worried. Was it about the villain incident yesterday? I saw it on the news, so he had made it home. He hadn't dreamt that part. But the alley, the rift. I'm fine, Mom," he stammered, the lie feeling thin and brittle on his tongue. "Just a really long day. I'm sorry I worried you." Inko's expression softened, but the worry didn't leave her eyes. She reached out and brushed a stray lock of green hair from his forehead, her hand cool against his skin. "You feel a little warm. Are you sure you're not coming down with something? Maybe you should stay home from school today." "No!" The word came out sharper, more forceful than he intended. He saw his mother flinch slightly, and immediately felt a pang of guilt. "I mean, no, I'm okay. Really. I think I just need some fresh air." He needed to get out. He needed to prove to himself that the alley was just a dream, that the sensory overload and the impossible strength were just phantoms of an exhausted mind. His mother hesitated for a moment before nodding slowly. "All right, sweetie. But be careful. Breakfast will be ready when you get back." She gave him one last worried look before retreating, closing the door softly behind her. Izuku let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He stood up, stretching his limbs, trying to shake off the lingering phantom sensations of the nightmare. He felt fine. Normal. Quirkless. The relief was so profound it almost made him dizzy. He walked to his desk to grab his phone and a jacket. His gaze fell upon his favorite mechanical pencil, a trusty Kurutoga model he used for his hero analysis notes. He picked it up, his fingers wrapping around the smooth plastic barrel, and it happened. There was no conscious thought, no application of force. One moment, he was holding the pencil. The next, a sickening crack echoed in the quiet room, and he was left holding two jagged pieces of plastic, the graphite core shattered into dust. Izuku stared at the broken pieces in his hand, his heart seizing in his chest. His blood turned to ice. That wasn't normal. He hadn't even squeezed. He had just held it. Panic began to bubble up, hot and acidic. No. No, no, no. It was a coincidence. A faulty pencil. Old plastic. That's all it was. He stumbled backward, away from the desk, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an enemy. He needed to ground himself. He went to the small kitchenette attached to their living room to get a glass of water, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. His mother was humming softly as she cooked, the smell of miso soup filling the small apartment. He grabbed a glass from the cupboard, his hand trembling slightly. He filled it from the tap, the sound of the running water suddenly seeming a little too loud, a little too distinct. He could hear the gurgle of it in the pipes behind the wall. Shaking his head, he tried to clear it. "You're just on edge." He put the glass down and turned to the silverware drawer, his mind still reeling. He needed to do something normal. Help set the table. Yes, that was it. He pulled out a spoon. It was one of his favorites from when he was a little boy, a sturdy, stainless steel spoon with a cartoonish All Might emblem stamped on the handle. He'd eaten thousands of bowls of cereal with this spoon. It was a tangible piece of his childhood, of his dream. He held it in his palm, his thumb tracing the familiar, smiling face of the symbol of peace. He took a breath. He was being ridiculous. He was Izuku Midoriya. He was weak. He was. His thumb pressed down. He felt a slight give. Not the unyielding resistance of solid metal, but a soft, subtle pliability, like he was pressing his thumb into a bar of cold soap. He looked down. A small, perfect indentation was now marring the face of All Might on the spoon's handle. Izuku's breath hitched. He stared, horrified and fascinated. Slowly, deliberately, he applied a minuscule amount of pressure with his thumb and forefinger. The thick, steel neck of the spoon bent. It didn't just bend, it folded over on itself with a soft, metallic sigh, as if it were made of warm taffy. He was now holding a U-shaped piece of metal. The glass of water he just poured slipped from his other hand. Time seemed to slow down. He saw the glass tumble through the air, the water within it sloshing in zero gravity for a fraction of a second. He saw the light from the kitchen window refract through it, casting a tiny, fleeting rainbow on the wall. His hand shot out, not with the clumsy desperation of his usual self, but with a fluid, impossible grace. His fingers closed around the glass an inch from the floor. Not a single drop of water spilled. He stood there, frozen, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. In one hand, a grotesquely twisted piece of solid steel. In the other, a perfectly saved glass of water. It wasn't a dream. The alley. The rift. The two streams of energy. It had all been real. Izuku? Is everything all right? His mother called from the stove. Fine. He squeaked, his voice cracking. Just dropped a spoon. No problem. He shoved the mangled metal into his pocket, his mind racing. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't risk breaking anything else. He couldn't risk his mother seeing. The panic was morphing, shifting into something else, a terrifying, exhilarating, all-consuming curiosity. His analytical mind, the part of him that lived and breathed data and observation, was roaring to life. He needed a laboratory. A safe place. A place where no one would see him, where he could test the limits of this thing that had happened to him. Only one place came to mind. Mom, I'm going out! He yelled, already grabbing his worn red sneakers. I'll be back! I promise! Before Inko could protest, he was out the door, not even bothering to close it properly behind him. He didn't run down the apartment building stairs. He took them 3, 4, 5 at a time, his feet barely seeming to touch the concrete. He hit the street and broke into a sprint, his destination clear in his mind, Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, the junkyard by the sea. The place he and All Might had designated as his training ground. The place he had been trying to clean, piece by piece, with his own 2 quirkless hands to prove his worth. The irony was so thick he could taste it. As he ran, the world was different. The rising sun was cresting the horizon, and its light felt incredible. It wasn't just warmth on his skin, it was a feast. It was like he'd been starving his entire life without knowing it, and now he was being served a banquet. A quiet, powerful hum resonated deep within his cells, a feeling of vitality and strength that was utterly alien. The lingering sensory overload from the night before seemed to temper under the sun's rays, the cacophony of the city sharpening into a clear, manageable symphony of information. He could hear a cat meowing on a roof 3 blocks away. He could see the individual stitches on the jacket of a man across the street. He could smell the salt from the ocean, still miles away. He reached the entrance to the beach park in what felt like seconds, not even out of breath. He vaulted the chain-link fence with a single, effortless leap and landed softly on the sand, surrounded by mountains of rusting, forgotten trash. This was it. His proving ground. He started small. He found a discarded truck tire, half buried in the sand. He remembered trying to budge it a week ago, his muscles screaming in protest, achieving nothing. Now, he hooked his fingers under the rim and lifted. It came free with the weight and resistance of a throw pillow. He tossed it aside, and it flew 100 feet through the air, landing with a muted thump on a pile of sodden couches. His eyes widened. Okay. That was more than he expected. He found a rusted, doorless refrigerator, the kind of heavy, industrial appliance that would take 3 strong men to move. He wrapped his arms around it, planted his feet, and prepared to heave with all his might. But there was no might to give. The moment he decided to lift, the refrigerator rose from the sand as if it were an empty cardboard box. He held the several hundred-pound hunk of metal aloft with one hand, his arm not even tensed. He stared at it, his mind refusing to process the input from his eyes. Physics had ceased to apply to him. He could feel the dense, cold weight of it, but his body simply didn't care. He gently set it down, his heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and elation. Strength. He had strength. Unbelievable, impossible strength. What else? He looked across the vast, trash-strewn expanse of the beach. It stretched for several hundred meters to the water's edge. He remembered All Might telling him to run sprints here until he collapsed. How fast can I run? He wondered. He focused on the far end of the beach, by the concrete retaining wall. He crouched, getting into a runner's stance. He took a breath, and pushed off. The world dissolved into a sickening, incomprehensible blur of brown and blue. A hurricane of wind roared past his ears. Before he could even form a complete thought, his face was inches from the hard concrete of the retaining wall. He flailed, pinwheeling his arms, and managed to stop himself just before impact, his sneakers digging deep furrows in the sand. He stood there, panting, dizzy. He had crossed the entire beach in the time it took to blink. He hadn't even felt his legs moving. He had just been here. Okay, he whispered to himself, his voice trembling. Control, Midoriya. Analyze and control. He looked back towards his starting point. This time, he wouldn't just run. He would focus. He would try to see. He pushed off again, but this time he concentrated, willing the world to make sense. And it did. It was like a switch was flipped in his brain. The world didn't slow down. His perception accelerated to match his speed. He was moving in a golden-tinted blur, but he could see everything with perfect, crystalline clarity. He could see the individual grains of sand being kicked up by his feet, hanging suspended in the air. He could see a crab skittering out of his path in what, to it, must have been geological time. He moved with a grace he'd never known, weaving between piles of junk, his body responding to his thoughts with instantaneous precision. He came to a gentle stop back where he started. No dizziness. No disorientation. Just a breathless sense of wonder. Super strength. Super speed. The classic power set of a premier hero. The kind of power he had only ever dreamed of, catalogued in his notebooks with a painful longing. He looked up at the sky, a brilliant, cloudless blue. The sun felt like a benediction on his skin. He felt so full of energy, so light. A giddy, hysterical laugh bubbled up in his chest. He felt powerful. He looked at the largest pile of trash, a veritable mountain of rusted cars, broken appliances, and rotting furniture. He remembered trying to climb it once and slipping on a loose piece of sheet metal. I bet I can jump it, he thought, a reckless grin spreading across his face. He bent his knees, channeling that feeling of coiled energy. He wasn't aiming for the sky, just for the other side of the junk pile. He pushed off the ground, expecting a satisfying, powerful leap. He vastly, comically, miscalculated. The ground didn't just fall away beneath him. It vanished. He didn't leap, he launched. He shot upwards like a missile, a startled yelp escaping his lips. He rocketed past the top of the trash pile, then past the height of the nearby warehouses. The wind whistled past his ears as he ascended, 50 feet, 100, 200. Panic set in. This wasn't jumping. This was uncontrolled rocketry. He was going to go up, and then he was going to come down. Hard. He flailed his arms and legs, windmilling wildly in a desperate, undignified attempt to control his trajectory. He was a marionette with its strings cut, tumbling through the open air. He reached the apex of his ascent, maybe 300 feet above the beach. For a terrifying, weightless moment, he hung there, suspended between the sky and the sea. He could see the entire coastline, the curve of the bay, the distant cityscape gleaming in the morning light. And then, gravity reasserted itself. He began to fall. "Ayaha!" he screamed, the sound thin and reedy in the vast emptiness. This was it. This was how he died. Ironic. Given impossible power only to be killed by his own incompetence within hours. But as he plummeted, something else kicked in. That same instinct that had allowed him to perceive the world at super speed. He stopped flailing. He stopped fighting the air. The terror was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but beneath it, the energy from the sun was a steady, warm presence. It felt buoyant. He extended his arms, like he'd seen heroes do in countless videos. He didn't think about the physics of it, the impossibility. He just willed it. He willed the fall to stop, and it did. With a gut-wrenching lurch, his downward momentum ceased. He was floating, hovering, suspended in midair as if standing on an invisible pane of glass. He hung there, motionless, his heart trying to beat its way out of his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked down. The beach was a miniature junkyard far below. The waves crashed against the shore in silent, white lines. He was flying. He was flying. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, but instead of pain, it brought a wave of pure, unadulterated euphoria. A choked sob of laughter escaped his lips. He pushed himself forward with a thought, and he drifted gently over the water. He banked left, the movement as natural as turning his head. He shot upwards again, this time with purpose, a wide, delirious grin plastered on his face. This was freedom. This was the dream. This was more than he had ever, in his wildest fantasies, allowed himself to hope for. He wasn't just a hero with a quirk. He felt like a god. He soared through the sky, a tiny, joyful speck against the infinite blue, his earlier despair a distant memory, burned away by the light of the sun and the sheer ecstasy of flight. After several minutes of giddy, uncontrolled flight, he brought himself back down, landing with a soft crunch on the sand. He was breathing heavily, not from exertion, but from sheer emotion. Tears streamed freely down his cheeks, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of a dream so long deferred it had nearly died, now made real in the most impossible way imaginable. These were his powers. Solar-based. Biological. He could feel it in his very cells. This was the golden energy, the legacy of the dying Kryptonian champion. But as the initial euphoria began to subside, he felt something else. It was the other energy. The second one. The one that had felt like lightning and ancient stone. While the solar power was a constant, humming presence in his body, this other power was a dormant charge in his soul. It was a coiled serpent of emerald lightning, waiting patiently in the core of his being. It felt separate, distinct, magical, and with the feeling came a word. It wasn't a memory, and it wasn't a sound he heard with his ears. It was a piece of knowledge that had been planted in his mind, a key to a lock he hadn't known existed. It resonated with the dormant energy, a single, powerful, 7-letter word. A name. An acronym. A command. Shazam. He stood there on the beach, the gentle waves lapping at the shore, the sun warming his back. His analytical mind, which had been temporarily sidelined by the sheer joy of flight, kicked back into gear. What was this word? What would happen if he said it? The energy it was tied to felt immense, far more volatile and raw than the steady strength he currently possessed. Was it another ability? A transformation? Was it dangerous? The risk was astronomical. He had no data, no precedent. For all he knew, speaking the word could cause him to explode. It was the ultimate unknown variable. The cautious part of him, the part that had survived 15 years of being fragile and quirkless, screamed at him to leave it alone. To be content with the incredible gifts he already had. Strength, speed, flight. It was more than enough. But the other part of him, the hero analyst, the insatiably curious soul who had to understand how things worked, couldn't let it go. This power was a part of him now. To ignore it was to ignore half of his new reality. He had to know. He had to analyze it, categorize it, understand it. It was the same impulse that drove him to mutter and write in his notebooks. He took a deep breath, the salty air filling his lungs. He made his choice. He would face this unknown, just as he had faced the rift in the alley. He stood tall, planted his feet firmly in the sand, and looked up at the clear blue sky. He cleared his throat, his heart beginning to pound with a new kind of anticipation. He felt the coiled energy within him stir, responding to his intent. He opened his mouth and spoke the word. He didn't whisper it, he didn't yell it. He spoke it with conviction, with purpose, the sound clear and strong in the morning air. Shazam! The world answered. From the flawless, cloudless expanse of the blue sky, a bolt of impossible lightning descended. It was not the jagged, chaotic fork of a natural storm. It was a focused, solid pillar of golden white and emerald green fire, and it moved with the speed of thought, its target singular and absolute. Izuku had a single, fleeting instant of pure terror, thinking he had made a catastrophic mistake. Then it struck him. There was no pain. There was no heat. There was only power. It was the most overwhelming sensation he had ever experienced, dwarfing even the initial merging in the alley. The lightning was pure, divine magic, and it coursed through him, not as a destructive force, but as an act of creation. It felt like being forged on a god's anvil. The whispers of the 6 elders roared in his mind, no longer faint echoes but a deafening chorus, bestowing their gifts upon him. The wisdom of Solomon, the strength of Hercules, the stamina of Atlas, the power of Zeus, the courage of Achilles, the speed of Mercury. The solar energy in his cells flared, not consumed by the magic but amplified by it, supercharged into something even greater. His body, which already felt impossibly powerful, was flooded with a new, divine might that made his Kryptonian abilities feel like a pale shadow. A wave of energy exploded outward from him, kicking up a swirling vortex of sand and water. And as the light faded, he stood in the center of the miniature maelstrom, transformed. He looked down at himself. His rumpled school uniform was gone. In its place was a suit that felt like a second skin, woven from the very fabric of the magic that now coursed through him. It was a deep, forest green, the color of his hair and his soul, sleek and seamless. His wrists were encircled by ornate, golden bracers that hummed with contained energy. On his feet were matching golden boots that felt as sturdy as mountains. And on his back, a pristine white cape, fastened at his shoulders by golden clasps, fell to his ankles. It was heavier than cloth, imbued with a sense of dignity and age, and a hood was attached, currently resting on his shoulders. His gaze fell to his chest. There, in the center, was a symbol that was both new and intimately familiar. It was a diamond shape, reminiscent of the emblem he'd seen in his vision of the dying Kryptonian. But inside the diamond was not an S. It was a stylized, golden D for Deku. And it wasn't just a symbol. It was alive, crackling with faint, golden-green lightning that danced across its surface. He felt different. Taller. Stronger. The nervousness and fear that were his constant companions were gone, replaced by a profound, unshakable calm. It was the wisdom of Solomon, granting him instant clarity. He understood. He understood what he was, what had happened. He was a hybrid, a living conduit for 2 separate, immense sources of power. His base form was Kryptonian, fueled by the sun. This form, this transformation, was something else. It was his magical potential unleashed, a divine supercharge. He raised a hand, and golden lightning crackled playfully between his fingers. He felt the raw, untamed power of Zeus at his command. He felt the boundless endurance of Atlas, the indomitable will of Achilles. He felt as if he could lift the continent, outrun light itself, and think his way through any problem the universe could throw at him. He was Izuku Midoriya. But he was also something more. A champion. An aegis. A storm of divine might given purpose by a heroic heart. With a thought, he let the power recede. He spoke the word again, his voice now imbued with a deep, resonant echo of thunder. Shazam! Another bolt of lightning, this one ascending from him into the sky, reversed the process. The power, the costume, the divine calm, it all receded, flowing back into the dormant wellspring within his soul, leaving him standing once more in his school uniform, sneakers, and jacket. He collapsed to his knees in the sand, not from weakness, but from the sheer, soul-shaking awe of it all. He was panting, his mind struggling to process the scale of what he had just experienced. He was two people. He was Izuku Midoriya, the solar-powered alien. And he was, whatever that godlike being was. He looked at his hands, no longer crackling with lightning. They were just his hands again. But he knew now. He knew the truth. He was a hero. He had the power. He had more power than he had ever dreamed of, more power than All Might, more power than anyone. And a new, cold fear began to settle in his gut, a fear far greater than any he had felt before. What do I do now? The euphoria of flight had a depressingly short lifespan. It had carried Izuku home on wings of impossible joy, but the moment he'd slipped back through his apartment door, the crushing gravity of his new reality had slammed into him. He'd managed to give his mother a shaky, unconvincing smile, grabbed a new, pristine notebook from his desk, one he'd been saving for the start of UA, a foolish, optimistic purchase, and retreated into the sanctuary of his room. Now, hours later, the room felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. The sun was high in the sky, streaming through his window, and the light that had felt like a feast now felt like an accusation. It powered the terrifying, godlike engine that had been installed in his body without his consent, and he had no idea how to drive it. He sat at his desk, the new notebook open. The page was a mess. His usually neat, precise handwriting was a frantic, borderline illegible scrawl, the graphite of his pencil gouging deep into the paper. He was trying to do the only thing he knew how to do when faced with the unknown: analyze it. He was trying to cage the hurricane with data points and theories, but the sheer scale of it was overwhelming. At the top of the page, he'd written a title: The Anomaly, Power Manifestation Analysis. Below it, he had created two columns, a desperate attempt to impose order on the chaos churning within him. Classification I, Solar-Based Abilities, Constant/Base Form. Source, Alien Biological Integration, Designation, Kryptonian? Visionary Data Fragment, Catalyst, Yellow Sunlight. Note, feels like metabolic intake. A form of cellular nutrition. What happens at night? Or on a cloudy day? Do I weaken? How fast? Need to test. Ability 1, Super Strength. Parameters unknown. Lifted a multi-ton industrial refrigerator with one hand, 0 physical strain. Bent solid stainless steel with thumb pressure. Punched impressions into asphalt without conscious intent. Danger assessment, extreme. Risk of catastrophic collateral damage. Risk of accidental injury/death to others is absolute. Cannot touch anyone. Cannot hold anything fragile. Broke my pencil just by holding it. The world is made of paper now. I am a wrecking ball in a museum. Ability 2, Super Speed. Parameters unknown. Cross several hundred meters in less than a second. Perception accelerates to match movement, preventing sensory overload if focused. Danger assessment, severe. Risk of high-velocity impact is lethal to self and others. Requires immense concentration to perceive surroundings. A single moment of distraction at top speed could level a city block. Ability 3, Flight. Parameters, seemingly instinctual. Will-based propulsion. No visible energy output. Top speed unknown. Altitude limit unknown. Danger assessment, high. Initial launch was uncontrolled. Risk of falling from terminal velocity. Risk of collision with aircraft. What are the rules? Is it purely mental? Ability 4, Enhanced Senses. Parameters. All 5 senses are magnified to a currently unquantifiable degree. Hearing. Can discern individual sounds from miles away. Currently hearing. A car alarm, 7 blocks north, a conversation about grocery prices, apartment 2B, the internal mechanism of my own wristwatch, the beating of my mother's heart in the next room. It's too much. Sight, telescopic, microscopic, and something else. Can see the dust mites on my own monitor. Can see the frayed threads on a flag on a building downtown. Can see the heat shimmering off the asphalt outside. Danger assessment, critical/unbearable. This is not a gift, it is a form of torture. The constant influx of data is overwhelming. How do I turn it off? How do I focus? I can hear everyone's secrets, everyone's pain. I can't live like this. Izuku put the pencil down, his hand trembling. He pressed the heels of his palms into his eyes, trying to block out the world. The sensory input was the worst part. It was a constant, unrelenting assault. He had tried to focus, to filter it, but it was like trying to listen to a single conversation in a stadium where everyone was screaming. He felt a migraine building behind his eyes, a sharp, stabbing pain that was a direct result of the sheer volume of information his brain was being forced to process. He was breaking. The fear was a physical thing, a cold dread that settled deep in his bones. This power wasn't a dream come true, it was a nightmare. He was a danger to everyone around him. What if he tripped and fell through the floor of their apartment? What if he sneezed and blew the wall out? What if he hugged his mom and accidentally crushed her? The thought sent a spear of pure terror through him. He looked at his hands, truly looked at them. They were no longer his own. They were weapons of mass destruction that he had no license to operate. His eyes drifted to the second column on the page, the one that terrified him even more. Classification 2, Magical Transformation, activated. Source, Divine/Magical Inheritance, Designation, Wizard's Power? Visionary Data Fragment, Activation Method, Vocal Command Shazam. He had written the name, and below it, the meaning he had somehow understood in the instant of his transformation. S. The wisdom of Solomon. H. The strength of Hercules. A. The stamina of Atlas. Z. The power of Zeus. A. The courage of Achilles. M. The speed of Mercury. Analysis. A secondary state that acts as a massive amplifier for all abilities, while also granting new ones, lightning manipulation, tactical knowledge, invulnerability? The feeling of calm. The absence of fear. It was because of the courage of Achilles and the wisdom of Solomon. It wasn't me. It was a program running. The power is even greater, even less controllable. If my base form is a wrecking ball, this form is a tactical nuke. He stared at the words, at the names of gods and legends. It was insane. Magic wasn't supposed to be real. Quirks were science, a biological phenomenon. This was something else. Something ancient and primal. The weight of it all pressed down on him. The secrets. The danger. The isolation. He was an island, a nation of one, and the burden was already too much to bear. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and stinging. He wasn't a god. He was a scared 15-year-old boy in an all-might onesie, and he was completely, utterly alone. No, the thought cut through the rising tide of panic. Not completely alone. There was one person. One person who had seen him at his lowest. One person who knew his dream, his desperation. The one person he had trusted with a secret that could shake the world. All Might. The decision was instant and absolute. He couldn't do this by himself. To even try would be the height of arrogance and irresponsibility. He needed guidance. He needed help. He needed the symbol of peace. He stood up, his movements now filled with a desperate purpose. He scribbled a hasty note for his mom, went to get some more air. So much to think about. I love you. And left it on his desk. He slipped on his red sneakers, his movements now unnaturally quiet, his feet barely making a sound on the floor. He opened his door and listened, using the terrible, wonderful new sense. He could hear his mother in the living room, watching a daytime talk show. The coast was clear. He slipped out of the apartment, flew down the stairs in a silent blur, and hit the street. He didn't run this time. He couldn't risk the speed. He walked, his posture stiff, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, trying to look normal. But inside, he was a screaming reactor on the verge of a meltdown. He knew where to find him. All Might, in his true form, had made a habit of visiting Dagoba Beach to check on Izuku's training, offering gruff, awkward encouragement. It was their spot. The walk was an exercise in torment. Every conversation, every car engine, every rustle of leaves was a shout in his ears. He focused on the rhythm of his own breathing, on the feeling of the sun on his skin, trying to build a mental wall against the sensory tide. As he got closer to the beach, a new smell hit him, overriding the salt and the city smog. It was the smell of ozone and burnt sugar. He recognized it instantly. It was the lingering scent of his own magical transformation. He rounded the final corner and stopped dead, his breath catching in his throat. The beach was clean, not just tidy. It was pristine. The mountains of junk, the decades of accumulated filth, the rusted hulks of cars and appliances, they were gone. The sand, once a grimy gray, was now a pale, inviting gold, stretching down to where the clear blue water lapped at the shore. Far down the beach, near the retaining wall, all the scrap metal had been collected, compressed into neat, dense cubes, and stacked into a glistening, geometric pyramid. The plastics were in another pile, the unsalvageable refuse in a third. He had done this. In the fugue state of elation and discovery that morning, he hadn't just tested his powers. He had, on some subconscious, instinctual level, completed the impossible task All Might had set for him. He had cleaned the entire beach. In a single morning, and standing there, in the middle of the reclaimed shoreline, looking out at the ocean with a bewildered expression, was the skeletal form of Toshinori Yagi. Toshinori had come here for a reason. Guilt was a bitter, coppery taste in his mouth, a feeling he was all too familiar with since his injury. He had crushed the boy's dream. He had seen the light go out of those wide, green eyes on that rooftop, and the image had haunted his sleep. He had been right, of course. It was too dangerous for a quirkless child, but being right had never felt so wrong. He'd come to the beach hoping to find the kid, maybe offer him some menial, muscle-building task, to show that he hadn't completely given up on him. Even if the ultimate dream was impossible, he had expected the familiar vista of urban decay. Instead, he found a miracle. He stared at the impossibly clean sand, at the perfectly stacked cubes of scrap. This was the work of a high-level construction quirk, a city-funded project that would have taken a full crew weeks to accomplish. He had been here 2 days ago. It had been a junkyard. Now, it was beautiful. All Might? Toshinori spun around. Izuku Midoriya was standing 20 feet away, looking small and lost against the vast, open space. The boy looked haunted. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his posture was rigid with a tension that went far beyond adolescent awkwardness. Young Midoriya, Toshinori said, his voice a hoarse rasp. What is all this? Did the city finally decide to clean this place up? Izuku just shook his head, his eyes wide and pleading. He looked like he was on the verge of shattering. I did it, he whispered, the words barely audible over the gentle crash of the waves. This morning. Toshinori stared at him. The statement was absurd. Impossible. A joke. But the look on the boy's face was anything but funny. It was the look of someone telling a terrifying, unbelievable truth. That's not possible, my boy, Toshinori said gently, taking a step forward. That would take. Please, Izuku interrupted, his voice cracking. Just watch. He turned his gaze down the beach. About 100 yards away, half submerged in the surf, lay the one thing he hadn't been able to move, the rusted, barnacle-encrusted hull of a massive, beached fishing trawler. It had been there for years, a permanent, immovable fixture of the landscape, weighing easily over 50 tons. Izuku walked towards it, his steps measured. Toshinori watched, a deep sense of unease settling in his gut. What was the boy doing? Izuku reached the trawler. He didn't brace himself. He didn't even look like he was preparing for a great effort. He simply placed his hands on the cold, rusted metal of the bow, and then, with the quiet, inexorable grace of a rising tide, he lifted. The sound was a deep, groaning screech of metal and sand. Water poured from holes in the hull as the massive vessel was slowly, steadily, and effortlessly hoisted out of the ocean. Izuku lifted it higher and higher, until the entire ship was held clear of the water, casting a vast shadow on the sand. He held it there, suspended in the air, his arms barely even looking tense. He just stood there, a small boy holding a ship aloft, looking back at Toshinori with eyes that screamed for help. Toshinori Yagi felt the world tilt on its axis. He coughed, a spray of blood speckling the clean sand at his feet, his mind utterly blank with shock. He had seen incredible feats of strength in his long career. He himself had performed them. But this was different. This was quiet. It was effortless. It was the kind of strength that didn't need to announce itself with a roar. It was absolute. Slowly, Gently, Izuku walked the trawler up the beach and set it down beside the pyramid of scrap metal with a soft whump. He then turned and walked back to Tashinori, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of misery. It wasn't a quirk, Izuku said, his voice trembling as tears began to stream down his face. I'm still quirkless. Something else happened. In an alley, last night. There was a rip in the world. And these lights, they came out, and they went inside me. 2 of them. One feels like the sun and the other feels like a storm, and I can hear everything, all might. I can hear the worms in the sand. I broke my pencil by picking it up. I bent a spoon. I flew. I don't know how to stop it. I'm scared. I'm so scared I'm going to hurt someone. He finally broke, his story tumbling out in a torrent of frantic, terrified words. He told him everything. The despair after their rooftop conversation. The alley. The silent, shimmering rift. The 2 dying energies, one of cosmic hope, the other of ancient magic. He described the visions of Krypton's death, and the rock of eternity. He explained the solar power, the constant hum in his cells, and then, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, he told him about the word. About the lightning from a clear sky, the magical transformation, the costume, and the power of the 6 elders. Tashinori listened, his initial shock giving way to a profound, jaw-dropping awe. He was the symbol of peace, the wielder of one for all, a power passed down through generations. He thought he understood the limits of power in this world. He was wrong. This was not a quirk. This was something entirely new, something that defied all known laws of science and biology. A dimensional rift? The merging of dying transuniversal entities? It was the stuff of comic books, not reality. But the proof was standing right in front of him, in the form of a clean beach, a moved ship, and a terrified boy who held the power of legends in his trembling hands. When Izuku finally fell silent, exhausted and emotionally drained, Tashinori did something he hadn't done in a long time. He felt a surge of pure, unadulterated hope. He had told this boy he couldn't be a hero. And the universe, in its infinite and bizarre wisdom, had responded with a resounding yes, he can. He walked forward and placed a thin, bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. The boy flinched, terrified he might break him. Easy, my boy, Tashinori said, his voice softer now, imbued with a newfound gravity. Breathe. Just breathe. He looked into Izuku's eyes and saw the same heroic fire he'd seen the day before, the same desperate need to save others. But now, it was trapped behind a wall of fear, terrified of the very power that could make his dream a reality. You came to me, Tashinori stated. With all this power, this godlike ability, the first thing you did when you felt lost was seek guidance. You didn't try to hide it and go on a rampage. You didn't let it corrupt you. You feared it, because you feared hurting others. Do you understand how rare that is, young Midoriya? Izuku shook his head, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. That power doesn't make you a hero, my boy, Tashinori said, the words coming from the very core of his being. He finally understood. The boy's spirit hadn't just been worthy of one for all, it had been worthy of this. Your soul does. The power is just a tool. Your heart, the heart that made you run toward that villain yesterday, the heart that is terrified of its own strength right now, that is what makes you a hero. He felt a pang of his own guilt. I was wrong. On that rooftop, I was wrong. I was a cynic, beaten down by my own limitations. I told you to be realistic. But I see now. Providence has chosen you. Not me. It has given you the power to match your spirit. His mind, which had been reeling, now began to work. A plan began to form, a new path forward. His dream of passing on one for all was dead, but a new, far more critical mission had just been born. He had to guide this boy. He had to help him forge this impossible power into a symbol for the world. You will not do this alone, Tashinori declared, his voice gaining strength, the familiar timbre of all might bleeding through. I will mentor you. I will teach you everything I know about being a hero, about control, restraint, responsibility, and symbolism. You have the power. I have the experience. Together, we will make you the greatest hero the world has ever known. Izuku looked up, his tear-filled eyes wide with a fragile, burgeoning hope. But how? I'm quirkless. The records, everyone knows. Records can be amended, Toshinori said, a shrewd glint in his eye. You are 15. It is not unheard of for incredibly powerful quirks to manifest late, especially under extreme duress. Like, say, being attacked by a sludge villain and then having a near-death experience. A cover story. It was brilliant. What would we call it? Izuku asked, his analytical mind latching onto the problem. Toshinori grinned, a flash of his old heroic bravado. We need something that explains the breadth of your abilities. The solar connection is the key. The source. What happens when a star dies and is reborn with immense power? Izuku's eyes lit up with understanding. A supernova. Exactly. Toshinori boomed. Your quirk, supernova. The ability to absorb and metabolize solar radiation and convert it into a wide range of superhuman abilities. It's vague enough to cover your strength, speed, and flight, and it gives us an excuse for any other abilities that might surface from your Kryptonian side. It was perfect. A plausible, scientific-sounding explanation for a biological miracle, but Toshinori's expression turned deadly serious. The other part, the magic. The transformation. Shazam. That must be an absolute secret. Between you and me, and no one else for now. Do you understand? The world understands quirks. It does not understand divine magic. A power like that would make you a target for every government, every scientist, and every villain on the planet. It is your ultimate trump card, to be used only when there is no other choice. Izuku nodded, the gravity of the situation settling on him. A secret identity on top of a secret power. The complexity was staggering, but it was also a lifeline. A plan. A path forward. I will get you into UA, Toshinori continued. I have a recommendation slot. I will speak to Principal Nizu. You will take the entrance exam like everyone else to maintain appearances, but your admission will be guaranteed. Your first and most important test will be learning control. Before you can save the world, young Midoriya, you must first learn not to break it. Standing there on the clean beach, under the warm, empowering sun, Izuku Midoriya felt the terror that had been crushing him for hours begin to recede. It was still there, a massive, slumbering beast in the back of his mind, but it was no longer overwhelming him. He had a teacher. A mentor. A symbol to guide him. He was not alone. I'll do it, Izuku said, his voice no longer trembling, but filled with a new, quiet determination. I'll learn. I'll master it. I won't let you down, All Might. Toshinori smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile. I know you won't, my boy. Now let's start with the basics. Your senses. Tell me the quietest sound you can hear right now. We're going to teach you how to build a filter. The age of All Might was ending. But there on the shores of Dagobah, a new age was dawning, born not from a passed-down torch, but from a dimensional rift, forged in the heart of a star and the magic of a storm. And its first lesson was about to begin. 10 months. 10 months is an eternity when every day is a battle. It is a crucible, a forge, a period of relentless, agonizing, and ultimately transformative pressure. For Izuku Midoriya, the 10 months leading up to the UA High School entrance exam had been a war waged on two fronts. The world outside, and the universe within. The world outside was the easy part. Under All Might's surprisingly stern tutelage, Izuku had learned the fundamentals of herodom, not from a textbook, but from the symbol of peace himself. They had spent countless hours at the now pristine Dagobah beach, not just training his body, but training his mind. All Might had been adamant. Izuku's power was a force of nature, and if he couldn't command it with absolute precision, he would become a natural disaster. The true war had been internal. It was the battle against the screaming, overwhelming flood of his own senses. The first month had been hell. A constant, pounding migraine from the cacophony of the city, the blinding detail in every surface, the phantom smells and tastes that threatened to drown him. All Might had taught him to build a filter, a mental fortress. Don't try to block it out, my boy, he'd rasped, sitting on a piece of driftwood as Izuku knelt on the sand, trembling from sensory overload. That's like trying to dam a tsunami with a picket fence. You must learn to let it flow through you. Choose what you want to hear, what you want to see. Focus. Your will is the gatekeeper, and so he had practiced. He had spent hours learning to isolate the sound of a single seashell from the roar of the ocean. He learned to focus his vision on a single grain of sand until he could see the microscopic imperfections on its surface, while ignoring the rest of the beach. He learned to control his strength by performing impossibly delicate tasks, reassembling the intricate gears of a broken watch at super speed, building a fleet of ships inside a bottle without ever touching the glass, using only puffs of air and controlled vibrations. He had become a master of his own internal chaos, caging the gods and the alien within him behind a wall of sheer, disciplined will. This relentless training had changed him. The frantic, muttering boy had been sanded down, replaced by someone quieter, more deliberate. The constant nervous energy was still there, but it was now channeled inward, a humming reactor core shielded by layers of control. He was no longer a fire hose whipping wildly. He was a laser, focused and precise. Now, standing before the towering gates of Yue Hai, he felt the familiar thrum of anxiety. But it was a low, manageable hum, not a debilitating roar. He could hear the excited chatter of 1,000 aspiring heroes, the frantic beating of their hearts, the rustle of their clothes. He let it all wash over him, a sea of noise from which he could pluck any sound he chose. He was focused on one thing, the mission. Rescue points, All Might had instructed him, his voice firm, just the day before. Anyone with a powerful quirk can break things. It's easy. Loud. It gets attention, but a true hero's first priority is always the preservation of life. Causing 1 billion yen in property damage to stop a purse snatcher is not a victory. Your goal in this exam is not to score the most villain points. Your goal is to achieve a perfect score in rescue points while causing 0, and I mean 0, collateral damage. Show them not what your power can destroy, but what it can protect. Show them control. Show them a new kind of strength. Out of my way, Deku! The voice was a familiar explosion of gravel and rage. Izuku didn't flinch. He simply turned his head as Katsuki Bakugo shoved past him, shoulders hunched, hands jammed in his pockets. The expression on Bakugo's face was a thunderous scowl, but Izuku's enhanced senses picked up more than just anger. He could hear the faint, rapid-fire tremor in Bakugo's pulse, a sign of deep-seated anxiety. He could see the microscopic sheen of sweat on his brow. Bakugo was nervous, and his nervousness manifested as aggression. Keikaken, Izuku said, his voice quiet and even. Good luck. Bakugo stopped dead, whirling around. What did you just say to me? He snarled, his eyes narrowed into crimson slits. Don't talk to me like we're friends. What the hell are you even doing here? This isn't a place for quirkless rejects to play pretend. The crowd around them began to whisper, their attention drawn by the confrontation. 10 months ago, Izuku would have shrunk, stammered, apologized for existing. Now, he simply met Bakugo's gaze, his expression unreadable. I'm here to take the test, same as you, he replied calmly. Bakugo's rage flickered, replaced for a split second by sheer, unadulterated confusion. This wasn't the Deku he knew. The stuttering, crying, pathetic Deku would have been a puddle on the floor by now. This quiet, unnervingly calm version was wrong. It set his teeth on edge. Whatever, Bakugo spat, turning away. Just stay out of my way, or I'll blast you into rubble. He stormed off towards the auditorium, leaving Izuku standing in his wake. Izuku sighed softly. He took a step forward, his mind already back on the mission, and the toe of his oversized red sneaker caught on a raised paving stone. It was the exact same misstep he had made in 1,000 anxious daydreams. He felt his center of gravity pitch forward, his body beginning the familiar, clumsy tumble. But he didn't fall. With a minuscule, almost imperceptible burst of speed, he shifted his weight, his other foot moving a few inches to correct his balance. To any normal observer, it looked like a minor stumble he had barely caught. To him, it was a controlled, conscious act that took less than a nanosecond. He stood upright, his heart rate never even climbing. He noticed a girl with a brown bob and rosy cheeks watching him, her hand half raised as if she had been about to use her quirk to help. Their eyes met for a moment. He gave her a small, grateful nod, and she blinked, a little surprised, before offering a shy smile in return. He walked on, his resolve hardening. He was not here to make friends or enemies. He was here to do a job. The written portion of the exam was trivial. The wisdom of Solomon, even dormant, had left echoes in his mind. The answers to complex questions of mathematics, history, and ethics came to him with an effortless clarity. He finished with half the allotted time remaining, spending the rest of it meditating, reinforcing the mental walls that kept his senses in check. Then came the briefing in the vast auditorium. The voice hero, Present Mike, was on stage, a whirlwind of leather and enthusiasm, his voice booming through the speakers. Izuku tuned up the volume, focusing only on the words, the information, 1-point, 2-point, and 3-point robots. Villain points. Simple. Destructive. And finally, listeners. Present Mike roared. There's the 0-pointer. This big fella is more of an obstacle. He's worth 0 points. Think of him like a thwomp from Super Mario Bros. My advice is to just avoid him. Izuku's eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed on the silhouette of the colossal robot on the screen. An obstacle. No points. A deterrent. Or, he theorized, a test of a different sort. A test of judgment. And you, in the 4th row! A sharp voice cut through the hall. Izuku looked over to see a tall, broad-shouldered boy with glasses and dark blue hair standing, his hand chopped rigidly in the air. You have been muttering this entire time. It is distracting and unbecoming of a potential UE student. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave. The spotlight, figuratively, fell on Izuku. He realized with a jolt that some of his old habits had surfaced. He hadn't been muttering aloud, but the sheer influx of data, the robot schematics, the arena layout, the point system, had caused him to sub-vocalize a low, continuous hum that the boy with enhanced hearing must have picked up on. My apologies, Izuku said, his voice carrying clearly in the large hall without being a shout. I was simply processing the tactical variables. It will not happen again. The boy Ida Tenya seemed taken aback by the direct and formal response. He blinked, then chopped his hand towards Present Mike. And a second point. The handout clearly shows 4 types of robots, yet you have only mentioned 3. Is this a misprint on UA's official materials? If so, it is a great shame. Present Mike just grinned. An excellent question, examinee 7111. The 4th robot is the 0-pointer. Like I said, he's worth nothing. Just a gimmick. Alright, that's all from me. Now let's get to it. Plus Ultra. As the students filed out towards their designated battle centers, Ida approached Shizuku, his expression stern. I must apologize for calling you out so publicly, he said, bowing stiffly. Though your muttering was distracting, my outburst was inappropriate. However, you grasped the true nature of this test instantly. I am impressed by your perception. It's all right, Izuku said with a small smile. Good luck to you, Ida-san. He walked away, leaving a slightly confused Ida in his wake. Izuku's mind was already at the battle center, running simulations. The other examinees were his biggest liability. They would be unpredictable, emotional, and focused on destruction. He would have to be their guardian angel, a ghost in the machine. Battle Center B. The massive city replica stretched out before him, a maze of concrete and glass. The other examinees were buzzing with nervous energy, stretching, activating their quirks in small, flashy displays. Izuku stood at the back of the pack, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and steady. He was expanding his senses, building a 3-dimensional map of the entire arena in his mind. He could hear the hum of the robots in their hidden alcoves, the creak of metal, the whir of servos. He knew where they were before the test even began. And stay art. Present Mike's voice blared from unseen speakers. The pack surged forward. Izuku did not. He waited. 1 second. 2. He let them get ahead, creating chaos, drawing the robots out. Then he moved. He wasn't a blur of motion. That would draw attention. Instead, he moved with a controlled, contained speed, flowing through the streets like water. A girl with pop-off balls for hair was cornered by 2 two-pointers, her face pale with panic. Before she could even throw one of her sticky projectiles, Izuku was there. His hand shot out, and with 2 sharp pings of his fingernail, he flicked 2 pebbles from the ground. They struck the robot's optical sensors with the force of bullets, shattering the lenses. The robots, now blind, stumbled into each other, confused. Izuku was already gone, melting back into the alleys. The girl just stood there, blinking, wondering if the robots had just malfunctioned. He rounded a corner, and saw a boy with a laser naval quirk blasting away at a 3-pointer. The robot was exploding, sending shrapnel flying towards a group of students who were too focused on their own fights to notice. Izuku's eyes glowed with a faint, crimson light for a fraction of a second. 2 needle-thin beams of intense heat shot from his eyes, not at the shrapnel, but at the air directly in front of it. The superheated air created a cushion of expanding pressure, a miniature shockwave that deflected the largest pieces of metal, sending them clattering harmlessly against a building wall. The laser naval boy Oyama struck a triumphant pose, completely oblivious to the fact he had nearly decapitated 3 of his fellow competitors. This was his rhythm. A dance of silent, invisible intervention. I hear something, he thought, his head snapping to the left. He focused his hearing, filtering out the explosions and shouting. It was a faint, muffled sound. Crying. And a scraping noise. He moved, his feet silent on the pavement. He phased through a narrow alley and emerged in a small, enclosed courtyard where a 1-pointer lay in a pile of smoking rubble. Underneath a massive slab of concrete, he could hear the sound clearly now. Someone was trapped. He knelt, placing his hand on the slab. It had to weigh several tons. He could have tossed it into the sky, but that wasn't the mission. He focused his vision, his sight penetrating the solid concrete. He could see the girl trapped beneath, a girl with earphone jacks hanging from her lobes. Her leg was pinned at an awkward angle, but it wasn't crushed. She was terrified, trying to pull herself free. Control. He didn't lift. He deconstructed. His fingers moved at an impossible speed, a blur of motion. He found the stress points, the fracture lines in the concrete. He began pulling it apart, pebble by pebble, chunk by chunk, creating no dust, no noise. It was like watching erosion happen in fast forward. In less than 3 seconds, the massive slab was reduced to a neat pile of gravel next to the trapped girl. He helped her to her feet. Are you okay? He asked, his voice calm. Jiro Kyoka stared at him, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. One moment, she was trapped. The next, the rock was just gone. And this quiet boy with green hair was standing there. How did you? The robot's explosion must have destabilized the concrete, Izuku said, a pre-prepared lie. You should find somewhere safe. Your leg might be sprained. He turned and was gone before she could ask another question, leaving her staring at the pile of gravel with wide, disbelieving eyes. The observation room. Well, he's certainly efficient. The dry, tired voice of Shota Aizawa, Eraserhead, cut through the low chatter of the other teachers in the darkened observation room. On the main screen, a camera was tracking examinee 77, Izuku Midoriya. Efficient? The kid's a ghost. President Mike exclaimed, leaning forward. He's got, 10 villain points. But my rescue point counters are going haywire every time he's on screen. He hasn't broken a sweat. His quirk, Supernova, is listed as a high-level energy absorption and conversion type, Midnight said, tapping her chin with her riding crop. But he's not using any flashy energy blasts. His physical prowess is off the charts, but it's his precision that's unsettling. They watched as Izuku appeared behind a 3-pointer that was bearing down on Ida Tenya. Before Ida could react, Izuku's hand shot out. He didn't punch the robot. He reached into a maintenance hatch on its back, and with a delicate, precise tug, he ripped out a bundle of wires. The robot powered down instantly, slumping forward like a deactivated puppet. Izuku nodded once to a stunned Ida before disappearing again. Did you see that? Power Loader grunted from his chair. He didn't just rip and tear. He targeted the primary power conduit. He would have had to know the schematics for that model. How could he know that? The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the small, white creature sitting in the primary observation chair, sipping tea. Principal Nisa set his cup down with a soft clink. His black, beady eyes were fixed on the screen, a strange, intense light dancing within them. His high-spec quirk was running at full capacity, processing thousands of data points a second. It is not his power that is fascinating, Nisa said, his voice a cheerful, high-pitched counterpoint to the gravity of his words. Though it is, by all accounts, extraordinary. It is his application of it. He is not fighting like a prospective student trying to score points. He is operating like a veteran pro-hero performing a delicate hostage rescue. Every move is calculated for maximum efficiency and minimum collateral damage. He is treating the other examinees not as competitors, but as civilians to be protected. Nisa's smile widened, becoming sharp and predatory. His file says his clerk manifested late, under extreme duress. To have developed this level of fine motor control and tactical acumen in just 10 months, it is a statistical impossibility. He took another sip of tea. Or, he is a prodigy on a scale we have not seen in 100 years. Either way, I do believe I need to have a long chat with this young man. And with Tashinori, who recommended him. The ground began to shake. A low, grinding rumble echoed through the city, growing in intensity. The examinees, who had been focused on their hunt for points, froze. A shadow fell over the entire street. From between the towering skyscrapers, the zero-pointer emerged. It was a monstrosity of green metal and black wiring, a moving building that dwarfed even the tallest structures in the battle center. Its single, glowing red eye scanned the area, and it let out a deafening, mechanical roar. Panic erupted. It's the zero-pointer! Run! It's not worth any points! Students scrambled, fleeing in terror as the giant robot began its slow, inexorable advance. Its massive arms swung, smashing through the facades of buildings, sending concrete and glass raining down onto the streets below. Izuku stood his ground, his eyes wide, not with fear, but with awe at the scale of it. It was exactly what President Mike said, an obstacle. A force of nature designed to sow chaos and test judgment. Then he heard it. A small, pained cry. Ow! I'm stuck. His head whipped around. Near the base of the advancing giant, pinned under a pile of rubble from its rampage, was the girl with the brown bob. Uraraka Ochako. She was struggling, but a large chunk of concrete had her foot pinned. The robot's massive, tank-tread foot was grinding closer, ready to crush her. The other students were running away. No pro-heroes were coming. This was part of the test. Izuku's mind went into overdrive. He saw a dozen different scenarios. He could move at super speed, clear the rubble, and pull her out of the way. It would be easy. But that was a short-term solution. The zero-pointer would continue its rampage, potentially cornering and hurting other students. He could destroy it. One punch. One focused application of the strength of Hercules, which hummed beneath his skin even in his base form. He could drive his fist through its head, ending the threat permanently. He could hear All Might's voice in his head, the triumphant cry of "Smash!" But he could also see the outcome of that action. The robot would explode. Its massive chassis would collapse, raining thousands of tons of metal and electronics over a multi-block radius. The shockwave alone could injure dozens. The very act of destruction would be the greatest danger. Destruction is not rescue, All Might's voice echoed in his memory. Show them a new kind of strength. His choice was made. He took a single, deep breath, and launched himself into the air. He wasn't a silent ghost anymore. He shot upwards like a green comet, a blur of motion that every single person in the vicinity saw. He flew straight towards the colossal robot's head, the wind whistling past his ears. Bakugo, who had been gleefully racking up points, saw the green streak and froze, his explosions dying in his palms. Deku? He breathed, his mind refusing to accept what he was seeing. Izuku didn't slow down. He braced himself, his hands outstretched, and met the robot's faceplate with a solid, resounding clang. He didn't punch it. He didn't blast it. He placed his hands flat against the cold metal. And he pushed. The zero-pointer's relentless forward momentum stopped. A groan of tortured, straining metal filled the air. The robot's massive foot, which had been inches from crushing Uraraka, froze in place. Its entire, multi-thousand-ton body shuddered as it met an immovable object in the form of a 15-year-old boy. Down below, a hush fell over the battlefield. Every student, every hidden camera, every teacher in the observation room was focused on the impossible sight. Izuku grunted, not from physical strain, but from the mental concentration it took to perfectly distribute the force. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he began to lift. He flew upwards, taking the robot's head with him. The machine was tilted back on its treads, its balance shifting. He pushed higher, his flight effortless, and with a final, terrible screech of metal, the zero-pointer's treads lifted from the ground. He was flying, holding the entire, gargantuan machine aloft as if it were a child's toy. The sight was so fundamentally impossible that it broke the brains of everyone who witnessed it. Ida's jaw was on the floor. Uraraka, now free from the rubble, stared up with wide, tear-filled eyes, a universe of awe and gratitude in her gaze. And Bakugo was shaking. It wasn't rage. It wasn't confusion. It was a cold, primal terror he had never felt before. The Deku he had tormented, the pebble he had kicked around his entire life, was holding a skyscraper-sized robot in the air. The power, the sheer, quiet, overwhelming power, it made his own explosions feel like children's party poppers. This wasn't a quirk. This was an act of God. And it belonged to Deku. The world as he knew it had been a lie, and he was being left behind in its dust. Izuku, holding the zero-pointer, flew slowly across the battle center. He scanned the ground, found an empty, wide boulevard where no students were present, and gently, with excruciating control, he set the massive machine down. It landed with a soft thud that barely shook the ground. But he wasn't finished. He hovered before its faceplate, and for a second time, his eyes glowed with a faint, crimson light. A single, hyper-focused beam of heat, no thicker than a sewing needle, lanced out and struck a small, external power conduit at the base of the robot's neck. There was a fizz, a crackle of sparks, and the robot's single red eye flickered and died, deactivated. No explosion. No damage. No points. Just a perfect, silent display of absolute control. The buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the exam. A profound silence hung over Battle Center B. Everyone was staring at the boy who now floated gently back to the ground, landing as softly as a falling leaf. He stood there for a moment, his chest rising and falling from the mental exertion, before he turned and began walking calmly towards the exit, leaving behind a field of smoking, lesser robots and the towering, silent effigy of his true power. He was Izuku Midoriya. He had scored a pitifully low number of villain points. But he had just shown the heroes of UA what true strength could look like, and for the first time, he felt the immense weight of his power not as a burden, but as a responsibility he might just be ready to carry. The acceptance letter was an anticlimax. When the small, unassuming envelope from UA arrived, Inko Midoriya had been a whirlwind of tearful anxiety, her hands fluttering as if trying to physically ward off bad news. Izuku had accepted it with a calm that unnerved her, his heart a steady, slow drum in his chest. He already knew the outcome. The true test hadn't been on the battlefield, but in the quiet, piercing gaze of Principal Nizu. The projector had whirred to life, displaying All Might in all his golden age, muscle-bound glory. "I am here as a projection." His voice had boomed, causing Inko to jump. He'd lauded Izuku's performance, his heroic spirit, and then the scores had flashed up. Villain points, 16. A laughably low score, barely enough to be considered. Rescue points, 100. A perfect score. A score so unprecedented in the history of the exam that the system had to be manually overridden to display it. Your selfless actions and overwhelming display of control have earned you the highest rescue score in UA history. All Might's projection had declared. Young Midoriya. Welcome to your hero academia. Inko had burst into tears of pure, unadulterated joy, hugging her son so tightly he feared for her ribs, a fear that was now very, very real. He had returned the hug with a carefully controlled gentleness, a gesture that required more concentration than lifting a car. The weight of his secret was a physical presence, an invisible barrier between them even in an embrace. He was a universe away from her, and she had no idea. The first day of school was a new kind of trial. Walking through the hallowed halls of UA was a dream he'd held for a decade, but now the dream was tainted with the stark reality of his isolation. He was an alien walking among humans, a god pretending to be a demigod, Class 1A. The name itself was legendary. He found the comically oversized door and slid it open, his enhanced senses immediately cataloging the room. He heard the friction of Ida Tenya's perfectly pressed uniform, smelled the faint, nitroglycerin-like scent of Bakugo's sweat, saw the microscopic dust motes dancing in the sunbeams slanting through the massive windows. "It's him," a voice whispered. He saw the girl with the earphone jacks, Jiro Kyoka, nudge a boy with an electric-themed stripe in his hair. The guy who lifted the zero-pointer, the boy, Kaminari Denki, breathed, his eyes wide. The quiet murmurings of the class ceased. All eyes turned to him. They weren't looking at Deku, the quirkless weakling. They were looking at a monster, a prodigy, a mystery. They saw the quiet giant from the entrance exam, the boy who had performed a feat of strength that defied logic. He could feel their awe, their curiosity, and a distinct undercurrent of fear. It was a cold, lonely pedestal they had placed him on. He found his assigned seat, ignoring the stares, and especially ignoring the murderous, confused glare from Bakugo, who was seated just behind him. The air around Kaken was thick with a volatile mix of rage and something Izuku had never sensed from him before: profound insecurity. The day began with the now infamous quirk apprehension test administered by their homeroom teacher, the perpetually exhausted Shota Aizawa, who had emerged from a yellow sleeping bag like a disgruntled moth from a chrysalis. "Bakugo," Aizawa said, his voice a dry monotone. "You placed first in the practical exam for villain points. What was your best softball throw in junior high?" 67 meters, Bakugo grunted. "Try it with your quirk." Bakugo had grinned, a feral, vicious expression. He'd stepped into the circle, wound up, and unleashed a massive explosion, propelling the ball with a deafening roar and a cry of "Dai!" Aizawa held up the device. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in excited chatter. This was what Yui was all about. Using quirks to their fullest potential. "It looks fun, you say?" Aizawa's voice had silenced them, his gaze turning cold. "So you think you'll be spending the next 3 years here having fun? What a joke. The one who finishes last in today's test will be judged to have no potential and will be expelled immediately." A wave of panic swept through the class. Izuku felt it, a chorus of spiking heart rates and shallow breaths. His own heart remained steady. This was a logical deception, a rational tactic to push them to their limits. Aizawa wasn't going to expel anyone on the first day. The paperwork alone would be a nightmare. This was his next test. The mission, to display overwhelming power without revealing its true, limitless nature. He had to place high, but not first. To stand out, but not so much that he invited deeper scrutiny. He had to carefully curate the perception of supernova. The 50-meter dash came first. He was paired with Ida. As Ida's engines roared to life, Izuku moved. He didn't use the full, reality-bending speed he was capable of. Instead, he moved at a precisely calculated velocity, his muscles contracting with a fraction of their true power. To the onlookers, he was a silent green blur, crossing the line in 3.04 seconds. Fast, but not impossibly so. Ida, with his explosive start, clocked in at 3.02 seconds. "Impressive," Ida said, his engines venting steam. "Your quirk allows for silent, sustained velocity." "A different application of speed from my own." Izuku just nodded, his mind already on the next event. The grip strength test was a challenge in restraint. He held the device, and instead of crushing it into a diamond, he applied a steady, controlled pressure, watching the digital readout. He stopped it at 540 kilograms, a monstrously high number that drew gasps, but one he knew was within the realm of other higher strength quirks, like the one possessed by the large, multi-armed Mizo Shoji. And so it went. He performed superhumanly, but not divinely. He was careful, calculated, a performer on a high wire, showing just enough to impress, but never enough to truly reveal. Then came the final test, the ball throw. This was the one he and All Might had discussed. This was where he would make his statement. He stepped into the circle, the small, weighted ball feeling like a marble in his palm. The class fell silent. This was the boy who had lifted a robot the size of a building. What would he do with a simple ball? He didn't wind up like Bakugo. He didn't prepare an explosion. He simply looked up at the sky, his eyes tracking a path into the infinite blue. He brought his arm back, and with a smooth, fluid motion that was biomechanically perfect, he threw. There was no sonic boom, no visible shockwave. Just a faint whistle as the ball vanished from sight. The class waited. And waited. Aizawa stared at the device in his hand, his mouth slightly agape. After a long, silent moment, he held it up. The screen displayed a single, sideways figure 8. Infinity? Kaminari breathed. He threw it into orbit? Aizawa's gaze on Izuku was sharp, analytical, and deeply suspicious. Midoriya, he said, his voice flat. Explain the mechanics of your quirk. This was the moment. The pre-planned, carefully rehearsed explanation. My quirk, supernova, allows my body to absorb and store solar radiation, Izuku began, his voice calm and clear, reciting the script he and Toshinori had perfected. I can then metabolize that stored energy to achieve a variety of effects. For the throw, I converted a significant amount of stored energy into pure kinetic force, applying it directly to the ball upon release. There is a conversion ratio, so it's not a limitless resource. Overuse can lead to severe exhaustion and cellular breakdown. It was a brilliant piece of technobabble. Plausible, scientific, and most importantly, it established clear, understandable limits. A resource he had to manage. A weakness. It turned him from an incomprehensible god into a high-powered battery, something they could understand. The class seemed to accept it. They were impressed, but they now had a box to put him in. So cool. Like a solar panel. So he's weaker at night? The questions buzzed, and Izuku let them, the misinformation spreading exactly as planned. He ended up placing second in the overall assessment, just behind a girl named Momo Yayorozu, whose creation quirk was astonishingly versatile, and just ahead of a stoic, quiet boy with red and white hair, Shoto Todoroki, who had used only the ice half of his power. It was the perfect result. Powerful enough to be respected, but not so dominant as to be an anomaly. He thought he had succeeded. He thought he had passed the test. He was wrong. The summons came at the end of the day. A polite request from his homeroom teacher to see the principal. Izuku's blood ran cold, but he kept his composure, nodding to Aizawa and following him through the pristine, echoing halls of UA. Principal Nizu's office was at the very top of the main building, a large, circular room with a panoramic window that overlooked the entire campus and the city beyond. It was the nerve center of the hero world, and sitting behind a large, clean desk was the small, furry creature who ran it all. Ah, Midoriya-kun. Please come in. Have a seat. Would you like some tea? Nizu said, his voice a cheerful, disarming squeak. Standing beside the desk, looking profoundly uncomfortable in his skeletal form, was Toshinori Yagi. His presence was both a comfort and a confirmation of Izuku's fears. This was not a standard student-principal meeting. This was an interrogation. Thank you, sir, Izuku said, taking a seat. His heart was a steady drum, his face a mask of polite neutrality. He was a fortress, and they were laying siege. Nizu poured 3 cups of tea with practiced grace. I trust you are enjoying your first day at UA? It has been very enlightening, Principal Nizu, Izuku replied. Indeed, Nizu said, his beady eyes twinkling. He took a sip of his tea. Enlightening for all of us. Your performance in the quirk apprehension test was remarkable. That explanation you gave Mr. Aizawa about supernova, it was wonderfully detailed. The concept of metabolic energy conversion from solar radiation is quite fascinating. A bit like photosynthesis, but for kinetic energy. A brilliant theory. The principal's words were light, but they carried the weight of a guillotine. However, Nizu continued, setting his cup down. High spec, my quirk, is a peculiar thing. It doesn't just make me smart. It allows me to process information, identify patterns, and extrapolate conclusions at a rate that surpasses any supercomputer. And when I analyze the data from your entrance exam, the complete lack of thermal output during your feats of strength, the impossible mass-to-energy conversion required to lift the zero-pointer, the fact that you generated no sonic boom when you moved at near supersonic speeds, and cross-referenced it with your performance today, a single, glaring conclusion emerged. Nizu leaned forward, his cheerful smile never leaving his face. but his eyes were as sharp and cold as chips of obsidian. Your explanation is a lie. The air in the room became thick, heavy. Tashinori flinched, looking as if he was about to intervene, but a subtle glance from Niza kept him silent. Izuku didn't panic. He didn't deny it. He simply met the principal's gaze and waited. A quirk is a biological function, an expression of a unique genetic factor, Niza elaborated, steepling his small paws. It adheres, however loosely, to the laws of physics. Your abilities do not. They operate on a set of rules entirely alien to our understanding of the world. Therefore, supernova is not a quirk. The principal's smile softened into something genuinely curious. So, my question, Midoriya-kun, is a simple one. Not what is your power, but who are you? Silence stretched. Izuku could hear the frantic beating of Tashinori's damaged heart, the hum of the building's climate control, the distant chirp of a bird outside the window. He looked at Tashinori, a silent question in his eyes. All Might gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. The secret is out. Tell him. Izuku took a breath. You are correct, sir, he said, his voice quiet but firm. It is not a quirk. I am an anomaly. For the next hour, he told his story for the second time. He spoke of the rift, the dying champions, the merging. He explained the dual nature of his powers, the baseline, solar-fueled biology of an alien, and the dormant, magical transformation accessed by a word of power. He left out the names, Superman, Shazam, as they were meaningless in this world, but he described the essence of the legacies he now carried. Niza listened with rapt, undivided attention, his head tilted. He didn't interrupt. He didn't scoff. His brilliant mind simply absorbed the impossible, paradigm-shattering information. When Izuku finished, the principal was silent for a long time, staring out the window at the city. A dimensional rift, Niza mused, his voice soft with wonder. The merging of trans-universal consciousnesses. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. He turned back to them, his expression no longer that of an interrogator, but of a scholar who had just been handed the key to a new branch of science. I am not angry, Midoriya-kun, he said, much to Izuku's and Tashinori's surprise. Nor am I frightened. I am intrigued. This is not a matter of school discipline. This is a matter of global security, scientific discovery, and existential philosophy all rolled into one. You are, quite possibly, the single most important individual on the planet. The statement hung in the air, heavier than any robot. Your secret is safe with me, of course, Niza continued briskly. The cover story of Supernova is clever, and we will maintain it for the general public and your classmates. But we cannot operate on lies here. From this moment on, you will offer you its full, unconditional support. Our top support course engineers, our most advanced laboratories, our greatest scientific minds, they are all at your disposal. We must understand what you are. We must learn the limits, the weaknesses, and the full potential of your abilities. Not to control you, he added, holding up a paw, but to help you control them. And to protect you. He looked at Izuku, his expression deadly serious. A power like yours, if discovered, would not just make you a target. It would destabilize the world. Nations would go to war over you. You are a living, breathing paradigm shift, and humanity does not always react well to those. Izuku felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled him. He had expected expulsion, quarantine, to be treated like a weapon or a lab rat. Instead, he was being offered help. He was being offered a shield. Thank you, sir, he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you? Think nothing of it, Niza chirped. The education and protection of a student who could potentially wrestle a black hole into submission is simply a logical investment in the planet's future. He turned to Tashinori. And you, Tashinori? You will oversee his physical and ethical training. But leave the science to me. This is far beyond your punch-harder methodology. Tashinori just grunted, a mixture of relief and indignation on his face. The meeting concluded, and as Izuku walked out of the office, the weight on his shoulders felt different. It was still immense, still terrifying. But it was no longer a weight he had to bear alone. He now had the symbol of peace, and the most brilliant mind on the planet in his corner. As he walked down the corridor, he passed his classroom. The door was slightly ajar. His classmates were packing up, their voices a cheerful cacophony as they chattered about their first day. Did you see Midoriya's throw? It was crazy. I wonder what his limits are. Aizawa-sensei looked pretty spooked. He's so quiet though. A bit intense, don't you think? It was the voice of the bubbly, pink-skinned girl, Mina Ashido. He saw Uraraka, the girl he had saved, looking thoughtful. Ida was chopping the air, discussing the logical application of their powers. Even Todoroki, the stoic boy of ice and fire, cast a glance towards the door, his mismatched eyes holding a flicker of curiosity. They didn't understand him. They couldn't. They saw a quiet giant, an enigma, a powerhouse. They didn't see the scared boy inside, wrestling with gods. They didn't see the crushing weight of the secret he carried for their sake. He was a part of their class, yet utterly separate. An island in the middle of a bustling sea. And as he turned and walked away, he knew that this was his life now. To walk among them, to protect them, to smile and pretend he was one of them, all while carrying the silent, astronomical weight of two worlds on his shoulders. The strength of gods was his to command, but the loneliness of a hero was a price he was only just beginning to understand.